So I'm just going to go through it pretty quickly and then do some questions. And then maybe we can make this available, like maybe a resource for parents to go to. So I'm not going to read every single thing, but just kind of give you a gist. I am not very good at PowerPoint, so okay. So first of all, when I just kind of want to explain how the classroom environment works. So when we get a classroom full of students, all of our students are here in this green area, which is called Tier 1. This whole system is called MTSS or RTI. MTSS is multi-tiered systems of, um, hold on, support or response to intervention. Those are two, their education is very heavy on acronyms. If we feel our students are struggling, we move them to Tier 2 before we can even think about referring them for special ed or anything like that. And we have to work with them for, we have to get a minimum of 6 data points on them. And that's usually about anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks that we have to do that. We do intense intervention with them. And then if we see they're not progressing, we meet with the MTSS team and we push them to Tier 3, and that's even more intensive. And if they're still not making progress, then the teacher would say, you know what, I think maybe we need to have this student tested for a learning disability or something like that. Now, there is a, um, a little hint that I tell parents. Um, if you want your child tested, you just contact the school and they have 15 days to get back to you on if they want it tested. If you, sorry, to let you know that they'll test your child. Usually, if the parent says, I want my child tested, they'll test your child. Usually, it doesn't come to that, but if a parent really wants their child tested, I'll say, get them tested so we don't have to wait this long. We don't want to fall through the cracks. So then the next step is in the MTSS, we identify the problem and then what is taking place, step 2, and then the intervention takes place. And then step 4 is the response to intervention. Is it working? So if it's not working, then we try to push for the IEP. And this is just kind of, so what is an IEP? You guys probably both know this. It's an individualized education plan. Basically, it has goals and services. It's documented yearly, and child, is reevaluated every 3 years. You should also be receiving quarterly progress reports. Like I get a report card sent home to me or in the report card specifically from the special ed team. Before age 3, an IEP is called an IFSP. So my own daughter at 3 weeks old had an IFSP until she went into the education system at 3 and then got an IEP. So an IEP, why an IEP? If the child is struggling in one or more areas, the child is having trouble paying attention or following directions, having difficulty interacting with other students or adults, they've been diagnosed with a disability. So that could be, under the lines of some of the things our children have. Um, they're not making progress in the general education setting, and they need additional support to keep up with the Tier 1 students. So the IEP process, the first thing is a referral, which you can do. Teacher typically does it, but you can do it as well. You need consent. They have to notify. If you call the school, typically you would probably talk to the school psychologist. They have to get a hold of you within 15 days, and then you have to give a letter of consent saying, yes, I want the testing to begin. And then the evaluation progress takes place. Then they have 45 days to complete that. Then eligibility determination, they'll hold a meeting, say your child is eligible or not eligible. And then usually at that meeting, they have the IEP. If they find the child is eligible, usually the special ed teacher will have kind of a rough draft of goals ready to go. So you can get the meeting done right then and there. But sometimes it's an additional meeting. Then they'll figure out what's the best placement for the child, and then they'll implement it immediately. As soon as the IEP is written, it's implemented the day of. Services typically start that day. So a referral. You can contact the teacher, the counselor, the school psychologist. I found that when the school psychologist got the phone call, then it happened. So that's a little tidbit. Be clear and specific about your concerns. Be prepared to provide documentation. I can't talk, I'm sorry. Documentation of your child's needs, such as medical records or teacher reports. Be persistent. Um, it is super important that you I always say it, be the squeaky wheel. Just be the squeaky wheel. And remember that you have the right to advocate for your child and to get them the services and support they need to succeed in school. You have that right. Then consent. This is a pretty short one, but they must respond to your request within 15 days. And then once consent is given, the evaluation process will begin. Evaluation, it's 40, typically it's supposed to, they have to start within 45 days. The evaluation, if the consent is within 15 days, but it can take several weeks or months to complete. Unfortunately, things get backed up sometimes, but I have never really seen it take that long. The school psychologist will evaluate, so they will miss class time, unfortunately. The special education teacher, and then the nurse always does an evaluation, and then possibly if you're seeing any like handwriting concerns or speech concerns, the speech therapist, physical therapist, occupational therapist will also do an evaluation, and then they will hold a meeting once all of the testing is done to determine eligibility. So a couple of things for eligibility. So when you go to that meeting, all of these things right here, disability categories for special education, these are all the different ways your child can qualify. Typically in a classroom, we usually have learning disabled, but like my daughter is other health impaired. She has been since she was born, pretty much. Other health impaired. So that does fit under one of the categories. These are some other words to know on the side here that can be really, really helpful when you go in to a meeting. I Googled a lot of the stuff and pasted, and there's a lot of stuff out there, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So the IEP development is when they're found eligible. So for example, if they say no, they're not eligible, we'll go to that after I go through the IEP stuff. Like I said, they usually do it right then and there, and usually the special education teacher, the school psychologist will leave, the nurse will leave, and it will be anybody that has goals for the student will stay at the meeting. And you'll go through the different first present levels of performance. So they'll tell you how they placed in, whatever the KTEA, which is the like percentiles. Like, and they'll show you the bell curve. This is where your child lies, and then they'll determine they'll determine goals. They usually keep the goals pretty simple. When I started in education, there was a ton of goals, and they've really simplified it. They'll pick like a couple, like maybe 2 math goals if the child qualified in math, and maybe a writing goal and a reading goal, and then obtainable goals. And then they'll talk about who is going to provide those services? How are they going to provide those services? Is your child going to be pulled out? Are they going to put you in to provide those services? And then how it will be measured? And then how it basically says what I just said. Sorry. How they will participate in the general curriculum as well. So be prepared for the meeting. Okay. Really learn about the IEP process. I hope this is helping. Okay. Be organized, bring any documentation. Again, like I said, be assertive. Don't be afraid to speak up for your child. And then get support. Talk to some other parents of children with disabilities. And I know a lot of people bring an organization with them. They'll bring an advocate with them. Um, I know that all you have to do is type in special education support systems, and usually something will come up. The one that's here is called PEP. Um, Again, be the squeaky wheel. You are your child's best advocate. Also, talk about your child's strengths. And it's kind of, if they're old enough, have your child there at the meeting. My daughter loves to attend for meetings. She likes to know what's going on. Um, you have the right to be involved in all aspects of the meeting. And if you disagree with it, you can request a due process hearing. And due process is just basically, I've never seen it happen in my career. But again, I was a regular education teacher. I'm sure it happened. We just didn't know about it. Um, Implementation is effective immediately, and then IEP is updated yearly upon request or to incorporate new data. So, for example, one of my students last year qualified, and we didn't have any math goals in his IEP, and did his whole IEP. And then about 3 weeks later, I'm like, he needs math goals. And so I contacted our special education teacher, and she's like, I agree. And then we contacted the mom, and we just came back and met for like literally 30 minutes and added another goal in. So it can be modified at any time. My daughter's IEP was due in September. We knew she was starting middle school this year, so we moved it to May. So we had our IEP meeting in May so that we knew everything was going to be in place for her to move on to middle school. And then the whole little wheel you saw at the beginning, they'll be reevaluated again every 3 years. All the testing will take place again. So that's every 3 years, but every year they'll have a new meeting and where you look at the goals and change the goals, modify the goals, add goals, take goals out. Um, so kind of, there's a lot to it. What if my child, or what if my school, so for example, you have the IEP set, you're ready, you're going, and about 6 months in, you're like, wait, my child isn't getting the hours she's supposed to be getting, or my son, we moved and they're not following the IEP. You can request mediation with the school district to resolve the issue. And if that doesn't work, then you can do a due process hearing. Then you can go even further and complaint to the State Department of Education, and then they get involved, and then a lawsuit after that. Um, and if you're successful in any of these actions, it is the district has to pay for your attorney. Now, if it is not successful, they won't pay. But if you're successful, they'll pay. These are just some of the options. The best course of action depends on the circumstances of the case. But again, I've never seen that happen, but I know it happens all the time. Our district here that we used to work for gets sued all the time. Okay, so here's some additional tips. Keep detailed records, phone calls, email, everything to try to resolve the issue. Get support again. Talk to other people. Talk to other parents, advocacy groups, and just be persistent. It's being persistent is the best thing to do. Sometimes I feel like the helicopter mom, but once you do it a few times, they do what they're supposed to do. Okay. We got a question, a couple of these questions before, but can it be carried over, an IEP carried over to college? No. It goes until the child is 22, but that's in public education. That's K-12. And some special education students go up to age 21, 22. As soon as they graduate high school, there's no longer an IEP. And that is because colleges just have different laws that they have to go by. So that is when 504 comes in. And they don't call it a 504 in college. They'll call it accommodations. Just learned that. I thought it was called a 504. So a 504 is also defined by law. It's basically a list of accommodations. I've had many students on 504s, and 504s can happen. The process is a lot quicker than an IEP, and it is They can be revisited. I had a student break his arm right before testing and couldn't use the computer. And so we wrote up a 504 really fast so that, um, we just did. I don't even get a 504 just for testing. So, these are just some little, the differences between them. They're both by law. Um, IEPs are based more on a disability, where a 504 is more of an impairment. Um, it says, what I thought was interesting about the 504 is it said there was no formal plan. Every 504 I've been involved in, there's a written plan. Always been. It doesn't need to be reevaluated, but I like to, any students that I had on a 504, I didn't want just a piece of paper thrown at me. And I looked at it, I wanted to meet with the parents, and typically the counselors in charge of them, and I wanted to meet with them every year and talk about it. But it's not required. So this is just another, that's really hard to read. It's a really small, I can make it bigger, but it's just another how you compare a 504 and IEP. I know a couple of FACE students that are FACE students teacher talk, FACE children that have a 504 versus an IEP. But I believe most FACE children have an IEP. So there's three prongs. It's a physical or mental impairment, again, not a disability, that poses a substantial limitation or a major life activity. It affects their learning, their participating, or their assessing. So a lot of students nowadays have 504s for anxiety. ADHD is another one. Typically, ADHD can fall under IEP, but some parents will say, no, I want a 504 instead. So first thing is gather documentation, reach out to the school 504 coordinator, that's typically the counselor, write a formal request. Typically, you could contact, if I was the teacher and you contact me and said, I really want a 504 for my child, I'll be like, no problem, let's go. I wouldn't ask you to bring in all this documentation. Um, Prepare for the evaluation process, and it doesn't take too long. It's just the counselor will sit down and talk to the student and find out what works best for them, talk to them about their needs and their likes, and try to figure out a way to make things more accessible for them at school. Um, it's two or more people for the team. It's typically the parents, the teacher, and the counselor that's there to come up with a plan. Again, physical or mental impairment. Um, not yeah. So I'm not going to read every part for you. So here's some examples: extra time on tests, a note taker in class, preferential seating. That was a big one. I had a student who was hearing impaired one year, and we had an audio enhancement system, and I had to make sure I had that on anytime I was teaching. And if any other students were talking, they had the microphone and they were talking. Access to assisted technology. So a student that maybe like needs to type instead of handwriting or something, needs to dictate something. Modified assignments, that's a big one. Alternative testing methods, counseling or social skills training. I had a little girl that just needed to go out in the hallway and take a breath when things got to be too much for her. And that was written in her 504 plan. Here are some specific things that you can actually ask for accommodations either in for the 504. Extra time on tests or assignments. Students with ACE syndrome may have difficulty processing information and completing tests quickly. Extra time can help them to show what they know and can do. Preferential seating. For my daughter even said today, Mom, I couldn't see in math. So my teacher had talked to my other teacher, her resource teacher, and I got moved up into a different place. So I was like, that's amazing. And access to assisted technology. My daughter has she has an iPad and a computer in that she uses readily. Modified assignments, again, shortening them, letting them someone write for them, any kind of modification, and then alternative testing methods, um, so they can present something orally versus um, writing it out. I know in the past I had a student that um, really struggled with fine motor, so instead of drawing a picture of something, he could find something online and print up the picture and put that into his project. Also, they can like have things read to them, like reading a question. That can be an accommodation as well. Lumbar syndrome, again, extra time. The lumbar, I'm not really familiar with lumbar syndrome. My daughter does not have it, but difficulty sitting, I know that they can have wiggle seats or they can stand. There could be flexible seating. A lot of teachers do that now, where students can sit on there's like big exercise balls, or they have these little rocking seats that they can sit on, bean bag chairs, things like that. Preferential seating again, access to an ergonomic equipment that supports that lumbar system. Yep, there you go. I was just, I didn't care if my kids stood. I had kids that put their feet up. I didn't care. But some teachers, this is why it's so important to have it in place, because some teachers don't abide by all that. Flexible seating again talks about that. Oh, did I do that twice? I might have. Home-based instructions. This can also be 5-4. I'm not familiar with that either, but I did include it. And then again, this is where the 504 is for college. So the 504 isn't what they call it in college, but they can still receive services and accommodations from a college through Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Basically, when the student, or before they get into college, they need to get a hold of, go into, I think it's called student, I think they just, you contact student services. And I remember there's an amazing show on Netflix. I can't think of the name of it now, about a boy who has Asperger's and autism, or maybe I think it's Asperger's, and he didn't know that, and he went to the college. They like, we have special services for you, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. So they will, first of all, you need all documentation, medical records, education files, all of that. And then disability services will, they're a little bit, oh, right there. Each college has a disability services office that is responsible for coordinating accommodations for students and disabilities. They'll schedule a meeting. I remember all through my education, there was this wonderful, I don't remember his name, I think it was Derek. All 4 years of my going through school, I had a classmate who was a paraplegic, and he was right there in class, but I'm sure he had accommodations. And um, I just kind of took it for granted that he was in there. Now I think about it, I'm like, wow, that was amazing. Um, and then review and update, just like the regular 504, review and update it annually or anytime. Anytime. Okay.